Sweet. So, this is technically my second ever mini lecture, but my first day doing lectures. So, please be extra nice at the end. And if you tell me how great I did, I might have $5 coming your way. So I'm going to talk about a few things that I've learned when constructing a speech, and also some things that I've noticed as far as how the world is organized with speaking and public speakers. What I normally see is that the method that I'm going to discuss today is everybody knows it. I promise you that you know of this method, of this technique. You may not have heard it addressed or named what I'm going to call it today, but I guarantee you know it, and that's called it's called the Greek Rule of Threes. This man's name is Sam Chan. You may not have heard of him. You may have. Conveniently, Sunday we went over it in one of my classes that I'm in at my church. So I'm like, oh, this is perfect. This is a great way to talk about it. It's a great way to explain it to people because it was harder to explain this until I saw his video and he talks about how to draw it and everything. And so it is a blurry picture, so I'm going to draw it on the board. But basically, the Greek Rule of Threes is something that we're all familiar with. It's the name. Don't get caught up on that. It's just because the Greeks were the ones that kind of established it and established that name. But he talks about movies and comedy and all sorts of things being addressed in like the number 3 format. So, your name, right? Okay, good. Your speech, I specifically remember it because you were talking about how you would take your thoughts and you would need to, you specifically said, with clear, confident communication. That's what you said. And that is ultimately what the Greek Rule of Threes is. It's stuff like that. It's in comedy when you talk about, the example he used, I think, is like an Englishman, Irishman, and an American walk into a pub. Like that's how comedy would start. That's how a lot of things start. But specifically, story starts with the Greek Rule of Threes as well. And he draws this picture here. And I'm going to kind of simplify the last word because I have no idea how to say it. But he talks about the introduction of a story or a speech and 2 key moments along with the body and the conclusion. And the 2 key pivotal moments he describes as the mission or your vision. And this key moment here is the bridge. And then he uses a really fancy word here, and ultimately all it means is the new normal. So every single movie, book, show, comedy special, political speech, a lot of times follows this format. You'll talk about, and honestly, I really am trying to think of a speech that I heard in here that didn't follow that format. I think most people told, especially easier with that narrative speech and introducing yourself, it's a lot easier to tell your life story in the form of story, because that's what it is. But in order to keep people entertained, you have to put things in forms of story. And you might be thinking like, okay, well, why do I have to keep people entertained on my speech? It's ultimately, if you want to get your message across, it's just a simple fact that you have to entertain people. If you want to get your message across with lectures, you have to entertain people. I know I doze off and get cloudy, blurry vision in a bunch of my classes because I'm not engaged enough or I'm too bored. And so it's really important to entertain people in your speech. And how do you entertain people? You entertain them through story. You entertain them through getting your point across in story. You could say something or you could tell a story about that thing, and that will get your point across a lot better. This also works for constructing a testimony. If you're into that or if you're struggling to do that, that's specifically what he addressed. But it talks about the intro and your mission. So as far as we could say one of our speeches, we talked about our background, our history, the things that happened in our life, our mission. So what were our goals at that time? What were the things that shaped us? And the body, how did we execute our goals? What was our life like when we were pursuing that mission that we had in front of us? And then we all went into the bridge, which was the turning point. For a lot of us, it was, for myself, it was getting to know Jesus. And for I think it was, you said your big turning point was following your true passion, regardless of what other people would have thought. And then we wrap it up with that big conclusion. In movies, Sam Chan described it as like in action movies, the big part where they blow everything up and it's the final fight. And for myself, it would be The big conclusion is, while what I'm trying to do as far as Christianity and evangelism. And then he uses a fancy word, and ultimately it just means new normal. That's the easiest way for me to remember it than try to remember some word. But if you really want to know, you can go on to, you can look up just Sam Cham, Greek Rule of Threes, and you'll find the video. And he does a great job of explaining it. But yeah, so everything actually follows this format, even if you don't know that you're doing that. And most of the time, we'll defaultly follow this format. Some of the greatest speakers of all time do this as well, politicians especially. But one person that everybody in here is familiar with is Martin Luther King Jr. And so he was one of the most famous public speakers of all time. As you know, he influenced millions of people to pursue a culture of equality. And actually, his most famous speech follows the Greek Rule of Threes, follows that format, keeps people engaged. I was curious, just thinking about Martin Luther King Jr. and how did he get his message across and shift a culture. That's not easy to do. He did that very, very well. He completely took a narrative that was wrong and abusive, and he changed it to pursue equality among millions of people and changed a lot of minds. And I was like, how did he do that? How did his message become so inspiring for millions of people? And he uses the Greek Rule of Threes in his most famous speech, I Have a Dream speech. And he goes about his intro, his mission, and his vision, the body, where he talks about how he hasn't been seeing that, in America, and how he hasn't been seeing that equality. He has this big turning point bridge where he's like, this is what I want to see. This is how I want to see it. He has his big conclusion where he gets everybody super inspired. And he closes with his most famous line, new normal, of I want to live in a country that my kids are judged by the content of the character and not by the color of their skin. So there's no necessarily direct quote from Martin Luther King Jr. that says yeah, I use the Greek Rule of Threes in this format and for this speech, but you can see how they do that. And so I would encourage you guys to look into this. You don't have to do it like this, but it is helpful to tell a story in your speech, especially an informative one, because those can get pretty boring no matter what you're talking about. So if you go into something, telling a story, entertaining people, following a format kind of similar to a Hollywood movie, you're going to get your point across really, really well. You're going to entertain people, and people are going to remember it. And who knows, you could influence the people that you're talking to one day in order to do great things. And then I'm going to just close with something that I wrestled with for a long time, but after you finish your speech and you go into the questions and answers part. And for me, I had to wrestle with this topic as far as how evangelism goes, but it also applies to just giving regular speeches. When we're asked questions that we don't know the answer for, how do we approach that? And for me, I can remember a time where I was talking with a friend and they asked me a question that I didn't know the answer to, and I found myself trying to avoid it or kind of steer away from that question, not because I didn't want to answer it, but because I didn't know how to answer it. And I immediately would feel embarrassed, and I would feel like I had to run from it, or that I wasn't qualified enough to share what I'm sharing about. And so when we're asked questions that we don't know the answer to, let's say can you just ask me a question specifically about Jesus? Make it simple. Or
did Jesus die on the cross?
Well, I don't. So, okay. When we talk about Jesus and dying on the cross, we don't need to talk. I'm going to shift to immediately. You're like, everything that he just said is I'm not listening to it. You, by stuttering, and which is sometimes unavoidable, but by immediately kind of retreating and losing your confidence and trying to deflect and purposely making it very, very obvious that you're not wanting to answer their question, Dr. Lang is going to look at me and say, okay, well, everything that he's told me up to this point, I'm just not going to pay attention to it. This dude has no idea what he's talking about. I don't trust this guy. He's clearly not educated enough on this topic. That's the automatic assumption. While that might not always be true, that's what we're tempted to think, especially when we ask people and they don't have answers. So, in the topic of evangelism, what is the first thing that we should do when we are asked a question that we don't know the answer to? Or in your speeches? It's to be honest. It's okay. That's something I had to wrestle with and learn and figure out, that it's okay to be asked a question you don't know the answer to. And sometimes that's good. most of the time it is good, especially with the topic of Christianity. When I'm sharing with somebody, I now view it as an opportunity to go back and learn something that I didn't know before, to go back and pray with God, talk with God, research, and truly try to figure out what it is that I don't know. And in the end, when I wanted to feel embarrassed, I instead walked away from that experience with another answer in the toolbox that I can use for later, and another opportunity that I had to grow closer to God. And if you're sharing about a topic, it's the same thing. Okay, I'll have to go research that and figure that out. You've automatically figured out and researched and learned more about that topic you were originally sharing about. And so when you are honest to that person and asks me, did Jesus die on the cross? I don't know. I don't know if Jesus died on the cross. I have to figure that out. How about this instead? I really care about you too much to give you a wrong answer, especially on this topic. What I want to do is I want to get your information and see if I can go back, try to research that for you, get to know the topic a little bit better so that I can give you an answer that you and I will both be satisfied with. It's the same answer. I don't know. But he now knows that I've been being honest with him for my whole conversation. He now knows that that I care about him, and that I love him too much to give him an answer that isn't true or just makes me look good like I know things. But then when sharing with the gospel, I also had to exercise caution when I was asked questions I didn't know the answer to. For this reason, a few verses that I'll explain here. Matthew 15:14 says, there's context to this, so these might sound a little funky, but I can also answer context questions later if anybody has those. But let them alone. They are blind guides, and if the blind lead the blind, both will fall into a pit. And 1 Timothy 1:6-7 says, certain persons, by swerving from these, have wandered away into vain discussion, desiring to be teachers of the law without understanding either what they are saying or the things about they make certain assertions. Especially for myself, when I was sharing the gospel, it was important, very, very important, that I understood, it is more important that I lead him nowhere than lead him to the wrong place. And so I had to, with my friend, I had to humble myself, which hurts sometimes, especially when you're trying to teach people something. But I had to humble myself, and I have to be honest, and I have to say, I love you too much to give you a wrong answer. So the final key points is just when you are asked a question that you don't know the answer to, be honest. It sets the tone for the whole conversation and the conversation that you had leading up to this point. That lets the person that you know, they're able to trust you, that you're going to give them the best answer that you can at that moment. Be confident. You're not in the hot seat. You don't have to run from it. Like I said, I gave 2 answers that said the completely same general core message. I didn't know the answer. But the way that I said it, trying to avoid stuttering, trying to avoid backing away or deflecting, having that confidence changes things and gives you a better outlet. And finally, the thing that wraps it up the most is you have to be caring. Caring kind of goes into being honest and being confident too. The person that you're sharing with or that you're giving a speech to, if you don't care about them, then what kind of motivation do you have in order to be honest or confident or respect them enough to give them the right answer? You have to care about what you're talking about and who you're talking with. You have to appreciate them and respect them enough in order to do the work to get them the truth. And that's what ultimately is important, and that's ultimately what will go the longest way. So that's all I have for today. It was short, but also my first lecture. So if anybody has any questions, I can answer those. If not, then I'll let take back over. Cool. I'm here to build. Brick by brick, the love gets spilled. Not just talk, I walk that line. Rooted and real, every step divine. No filters, no glitter, just a handling. The truth, my brand, the vibe won't bend. Horn section blast like a